All right, so today I'm going to be making a pepper mill out of this blank of ash. It's going to be a 10-inch long pepper mill when it's completed. Currently it's 10 inches and 5/8 long. That just allows me the extra length I can. So also it's a 3x3. It's air dried. It's plenty dry. It's about 8 to 10%, and that's plenty dry for how I make these pepper mills. I'm just gonna kind of give a brief overview of the techniques I use and the tools I use, and just like what goes into making one of these pepper mills. So right now I've got my chuck on the lathe with my drive center mounted inside the chuck, and then over here I have my live center. I'm just gonna be turning it in between centers to start out, get it roughed and rounded, and put some tenons on it so I can mount it on the lathe. Now looking at this blank, it's got a little bit of the bark on it, so the fatter side of it that I can have a larger diameter, I'm going to put that towards the head of the lathe, and that's going to be the base of my mill. So if you're looking at it right now, this is the top, this will be the part that you spin and crank, and this is going to be the bottom where the pepper comes out and comes out ground. So I'm just going to start out with a spindle roughing gouge to get this round. So it does not have to be perfect at this point. You are not doing any sort of finishing cut. You are just getting that round. Next steps are to make some tenons on it and to part it in half so it is in its two separate pieces, the mill head and the mill body. Okay. So I'm going to be using my parting tool. This is a 3/16 inch parting tool to make some tenons, and this is my narrow parting tool at 1/16 of an inch to part it in half. So making a mark right here, it's usually about 2/3 of the piece is going to be the mill body. So this is my mill body, and then this is going to be my mill head. Right there is where my main spigot is going to be, the piece that fits inside the mill body, and it kind of rotates on that axis to create the turning mechanism of the pepper mill. So first, I'm going to take my parting tool, I'm going to do a peeling cut, and the dimensions of this spigot are going to be roughly, I don't know the exact size of it. I always just do two lengths of two widths of my parting tool. That's roughly 1/2 of an inch. And I'm going to bring that down to about 1.5 inch diameter. That's just a rough estimate, and we'll finish the finished diameter of that later. Keeping those shoulders straight down as possible, as square as possible. So my opening at the top is the same as at the bottom. Okay, so now that's at its rough diameter. Now I'm gonna need some tenons that I use to hold it on the lathe onto this chuck. I need a tenon here, 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 and here. 4 of them on each end of the pepper mill, top and bottom of each end. So when I make these tenons, I make them about the width of my parting tool, and I only go in maybe 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. When I'm making these, a few things to know. I want that edge to be crisp and clean, the shoulder, And I don't want any loose, torn out wood on the corner of this shoulder as well. As you can see, when I do that, the wood tears out. I gotta clean that up, and otherwise it's gonna put things off a square. I want everything to be perfectly square when I'm mounting this piece on the lathe. So I got those two. Let me go ahead and tighten my quill, just to get rid of that vibration. One thing to note about the bottom tenon, I want that as big as possible because this is going to be my final diameter of the base. I include this tenon. Some people cut it off and change their final dimension, but I want that included. So right there, that's going to be pretty much the final diameter once I get this round and cleaned up. I'm just going to do a little more definition on this. I make them slightly dovetail, maybe like 5-10 degrees. My jaws are not dovetail, they're straight, but I find it holds it better if it's slightly dovetail. Okay, so now I'm moving on to my narrower parting tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and part this in half at the base of the spigot. If you can see where I'm parting that right there, leaving as much of that spigot as I can. Couple things to note when I'm doing this, I'm not going all the way through. I'm gonna bring it down to where it's got about 3/8 of an inch left and stop, and then slowly turn off the lathe and maybe take a little bit excess off. So watch how I do this. And I'm gonna step it down slightly. You can't do this all in one pass. Okay, so now it's down to that final diameter. I'm gonna turn it off. And now I'm gonna bring this off the lathe. And I can just simply twist this and break it to make it two separate pieces. You could just use a bandsaw, but I find it easier just to do it this way. All right, so now I've got my mill head and my mill body. Next step is gonna be drilling and boring out the center of the mill body. So I'm gonna go ahead, take out my drive center from the chuck, back up my tailstock, reposition some things, and I'm gonna mount this on here so that the bottom of my base is exposed, so I can start drilling from the bottom. When I'm mounting this on here, I give this a few rotations. It's just kind of a technique I use to trying to get it as square on there as possible, making it run true, and might take you a couple tries. So looking at your tenon, you want to look and see how true that is running, and I'm about 1/16 of an inch off possibly here, so I'm just gonna see if I can get that better. It's not super crucial to get it to run true, perfectly true. You want to, and that's even more off, so sometimes that'll happen. Making sure this edge is clean. Sometimes you can have gunk inside your jaws that make it off. And that's off about 1/16. I think that's about as good as I'm gonna get it. So I'm gonna leave it at that, make sure she's nice and tight. And first, addressing this side, what we're going to do is true it up using let's go with a small detail spindle gouge. You can use a skew for this, using a nice like edging cut kind of with the long point of the skew. It's just as easy to use this. I'm gonna run maybe 1500 RPMs. When I'm making this cut, I'm gonna do it slightly undercut, because this is gonna be what the pepper mill sits on the flat surface. You don't want it to have any rock back and forth. You want it to be slightly undercut, so it's just sitting on the outer edge of the pepper mill. When I'm making this cut, I want it to be as clean as possible, minimize my sanding. I'm gonna bring it back up. I am going to sand that surface when I'm done with it. All right, so now I'm ready to start drilling. I I'm going to go ahead and start with an 1 5/8" drill bit. This is a carbide drill bit. Also, when I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and move my camera. When I finished it, I left a small divot in the very center. So that's going to be kind of my pilot hole. I'm going to go ahead and turn the lathe on about, I don't know, you can do around 800 to 1,000. Speed is kind of a myth when it comes to drilling and that sort of thing. I don't really know where to set my phone. I'll just set it right there, see if that works. So when I'm drilling, I'm holding on to the quill and putting pressure backwards, or not holding on to the quill, you're holding on to the drill chuck, putting pressure backwards into the quill, trying to keep it as centered as possible. When I start, I slowly go in, letting the drill bit find its center, find its pilot hole. Wings come up and touch, those wings are going to find their own center too. Trying to get as little wobble as possible. Now it's established where the bit is. I'm able to drill a little bit faster. And I bring that in roughly to there. I'm going to go ahead and put my camera back up here. Now I'm going to go ahead and change drill chucks and drill bit sizes. Moving down to the 1 16". This is a keyless drill chuck. I like this one a lot better, but it's just a lot easier to have 2 drill chucks when you're making pepper mills with different diameters that you need to drill. Okay, so same thing, locking the lathe and holding on to the drill chuck, slowly starting into that pilot hole. And now she's established. Can drill quite fast. What I'm going to do, I'm going to drill halfway from this side with this diameter. This is the diameter that I bring all the way through the mill body. So I'm going to drill halfway through this side. And actually I'm going to have to adjust this. I'm going to have to back out my drill bit so I can get as much length of it as possible in order to make it reach its final size. Okay. Let's shut the lathe off and show you what I've got now. So it's all full of sawdust. My next step is going to be to sand this outer edge, sand this inside once I get rid of sawdust, and also sand the inside. And I'll go ahead and show you how I do that. So, this is 120 grit sandpaper on a 1/2" dowel. So I go ahead and I just kind of, using this sandpaper, I always am moving it. I'm never just holding it straight on there. I'm always applying light pressure and moving it back and forth. That's the best way to do it, I've found, to not apply any sanding marks. And I'm going to go ahead and put it, make sure there's adequate grit that I can hit that inside corner with. And I'm kind of twisting my wrist, going back and forth. I'm making a slight round over on the edge here, just to kind of make it soft to the touch. And then when I go inside, my tailstock out of the way, when I'm going inside, pushing it all the way to where the drill bit went to, check my depth, make sure I'm halfway through. I am. And I'm going back and forth. I'm getting rid of the sawdust that's in there. You can take an air hose and blow that out. That's one way to do that, but I've just found that's not completely necessary. You can just get rid of it by pushing back and forth, sanding my way down, getting rid of all the fuzzy wood that's in there. That's where the pepper is going to be stored. So you don't want your pepper to be mixed with loose wood that gets into your grinder. So I'm going to make sure I do this pretty thoroughly. Checking it, and that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna do a little more. Just turned up my speed there a little bit so I can get a little bit better sanding action. All right, so now we are done with that. We're gonna go ahead, take take it out and flip it around and drill my 1 1/16 from the other side. And just checking to make sure it looks pretty clean. No sanding marks, no tear out really, so that's good. Get rid of the sawdust there. All right, making sure we don't have any debris. Try to get this to run as true as possible. It's off about 1/8 of an inch. I think that's the best we're gonna get. For some reason lately I've been having problems. I think I have to take my chuck apart and take the jaws off and clean everything to make it run sure. Alright, so I'm starting this one off the same way with the detail spindle gouge, cutting it slightly under. Actually, you know, I'll try some skew action here. See if we can. I have a 1-inch skew using the long point. I just start creating a chamfer so I can have a place to go. And you're gonna start with your handle low and sort of acting as a peeling cut. You're taking a very minimal off, cutting slow and steady, reducing the amount of tear out. And as I come to the center, I lift the back of the handle. All right, let's see how that turned out. It's not perfect. I'm not too worried about the center tear out because I'm going to be drilling out 1 1/16 diameter there. So I think I'm going to call that adequate. I can sand that out. Everything, all the imperfections that are there, I think I can sand out. Set my phone back up here. And we're going to get set back up with a 1 1/16 drill bit. I don't really have a pilot hole like I did last time, but that's not completely necessary. I'm just going to start really slow and let my bit find its center. Let the wings touch, they find their own center. As you can see, there's very little wobble. And now I'm just going to keep cranking it in. You can do this in multiple passes, especially if your drill bit's not quite sharp, or if you're using a hardened steel versus carbide. Hardened steel is not going to be as good at this. You have to back out, remove the sawdust, come back in. I'll do that here just to demonstrate. Backing it out, it's bringing all the sawdust out with it. Release my tailstock, push up the tailstock until it's touching, and then keep cranking. And there we go, we're through halfway. You can feel it relieve the pressure. Okay. Back to do some sanding. This is the last time you'll ever be able to access this face while it's spinning on the lathe, so you have to kind of take advantage of that and get it to be a finished, clean surface. So going back and forth, kind of ensuring that that's slightly undercut as well by sanding the bottom more than I am the top. Sometimes you have to break through. There's a little disc that it leaves in the center. Doesn't quite cut everything, so you break through that and just going back and forth again, getting rid of all that fuzzy, non-wanted wood. Turn on my speed a little bit. You never want to shove your finger in there. Keep your fingers slightly clear of that because that thing can grab your finger and it wouldn't be good. Check it out, see how it feels. There is some sanding marks, but this face never really gets seen as the pepper mill is in display. You will see it when you take the pepper mill apart, but I put stain and beeswax around this too. I also finished the inside with the natural beeswax, food safe. Get my camera repositioned here. All right, we're gonna go ahead and take the mill body off the lathe. We're done drilling that. As you can see, it's drilled all the way through now, and it's pretty clean on the inside. And the drill bit usually matches up pretty well if you use those methods. If you don't, the drill bit can sway, and you'll have a lap in the middle where they didn't meet perfectly. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my mill head, mounting on the lathe as true as possible. And that's not as true as possible. See, like I said, I don't know what's going on with my truck. I have a bunch of sawdust in here. That's never given me a problem before, but I think it is. See how that goes? That's much better. Gonna tighten that. Okay, so now you can kind of get a better angle. This is my spigot, currently at like a 2-inch diameter. I have to bring that section down to the diameter of this and fit in there. So about that fit, you don't want it super tight, you don't want it super loose. When I'm able to put that on there, I want to move it back and forth maybe a 1/16 of an inch. You want some play to allow for the wood to move in the future. I'm going to use my 3/16" parting tool to bring that down. And you should, if you're new to this, you should use caliper and everything. But I kind of just bring it to the eyeball level, shut the lathe off and check how far I am off. I'm off about 1/4 of an inch still. So I want to bring it down. Check it out. And that's pretty close. So now I'm going to switch tools over to my detail spindle gouge, and I'm going to clean up this surface and the flat surface of that, reducing the diameter just enough, I hope. So I'm going to make a finish cut here, trying to get as clean as possible. I'm going to come in from the front, taking off about a 30-second maybe. Get that shoulder clean. Turn it off and check it. Okay, so that has very little play, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand that, so it's going to give it a little more play. Right now we probably have like a 32nd to a 64th of play. When I sand it, it'll get down to like a 16th of play. I'll go ahead and show you what this looks like up close. I'm gonna sand this surface, and then next I'll show you what I do here. As you can see, my production budget isn't very high. It's my iPhone. I'm gonna take this sandpaper off of here so I can use it a little better. If I wasn't doing a video right now, I'd be using dust collection. Okay, let's see how that fits and feels. It's gonna squeak right now, but in the future I'm gonna be adding wax, beeswax, make it much cleaner. But it looks great. For being the inside of the lathe, you want it to be perfect as possible, but you've got a little leeway because that's never even gonna be seen. So next, I move my tool rest perpendicular to the bed. And I'm gonna go ahead, and my mill kit has a driver head that fits on the front face of this spigot. And I'm gonna cut a recess for that. Getting rid of this, tear out wood. And I go about, probably only like 1/8 of an inch deep. And I don't know the exact diameter of it. I just look at my outer edge here, and I know it by eyeball by making so many of these, how big that should look in order for it to fit well. Now this cut, you're basically scraping end grain with a parting tool, almost as a skew. Some people use a skew to do this. And the key to this cut is making it applying slow and steady pressure as possible to make that little, you can see my shavings coming off. Minimizing vibration, you want ribbons of shavings. Almost, I don't know, I'm not up on the woodturner's lingo very well, but I think they call that negative rake scraping, but that has to do with your burr. It's basically sanding almost. It's like negative rake abrasion, if you think about it, because it's like a cabinet scraper, but on a lathe. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and show you what that looks like now. So I've got my recess. Don't worry about that being torn out too much. I'm not really gonna worry about sanding that either because that is all covered. Next, I have to drill a hole through this for the shaft of the mill to fit. The shaft of the mill runs the total length of it, and that shaft hole diameter is gonna be 9/32, I wanna say. So I'm gonna get some tools out of the way and mount my drill chuck in there and change the bit. Alright, so this is what I'm going to be using. It's just a twist bit. If I know how to do it. Let's see. Here we go. So same principles when drilling with this kind of a bit. Bring it up close, lock the tail stock, hold the drill chuck, pressure backwards and centered, starting slower. I can turn a little bit faster with this being such a small drill bit. I'm around 1600 right now. Start slow, finding its own center. And then once it's established, I release the tail stock and go ahead and just push. And same with this, I go halfway from one end and then take it out. That's why I have another tenon right here. Flip it around, put it inside this tenon. You never hold this part on the lathe with it. You always are using different tenons. Try and get it as true as possible. That looks great. And now you have a hole from your live center here that should be centered if you're doing everything else centered. Gonna turn my speed up, 1500. Going slow, reducing any wiggle. I'm going to do a couple passes here, relieving that sawdust, and I can feel when I've gone all the way through. Okay, so that completes the drilling steps of it. This is how our pepper mill will look on the inside, all completed. So now, next step is to shape and finish the outside of it. So I'm just gonna have to move a couple things here. Take out my drill chuck, replace it with a live center. That is how I hold the mill head, comes in this side. And then what I do to keep the connection in the middle secure, I wrap paper towel around this so it's a tight, snug fit in between. I'll go ahead and show you that. So this is one I usually use. You can reuse them. You want it to be perfectly to fit around that. You don't want some more over here, some more over here. So you have to use the scissors and cut that perfect circle. Otherwise, you're gonna have things tilting wrong if there's an uneven amount of paper towel. So I'm just gonna see how that checks, and nice and tight fit. So how I hold it on here is with a jam chuck. So if I just were able to put this on this tenon, that's one method, and then finish it up to this point and then remove that tenon. But that's gonna mess up with how much I've drilled here and all that sort of thing. So what I do is I just make a jam chuck. I'll go ahead and find one. Kind of jam chuck I use is just it's tapered down so it fits inside that hole. And this is softwood, this is basswood. I don't know if I mentioned, but this is ash. Softwood for my jam chuck usually works better because it is able to like dig in a groove for it and have more grip. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on here. Check if that's running true. It's usually not because I didn't put it in the same jaws as I did before. So no problem, just go ahead and true that up. get rid of that. That's not really necessary. So now looking at the top horizon of it, I can see that it's running true. Turn it off. And I'm gonna go ahead and mount it on the lathe, just like so. Putting this in here, bringing my tailstock up, locking it. Here I want it pretty tight, and also to lock the quill. Now at this point you can kind of check how true and centered your holes are running, how centered it's looking on my tenons. And I'm gonna go ahead and start with a spindle roughing gouge and bring it down to a shape that I like. So sometimes you're gonna have to keep applying pressure on the tailstock, just because one thing to note is, since here's my mark, or my separation, it's right about there, those cuts are both undercut, so the more you bring this area down, the lesser the tension is going to be between centers here. So you're going to have to keep applying, tightening your tailstock as you bring that down. And then another note about my design, if you think about a pepper mill, the top, you want a nice rounded kind of ergonomic look for where your top hand is grinding it. And then also you want sort of an elongated part in the upper center of the mill body. So that's kind of where your bottom hand fits and you can grasp it easily. So it has to be a nice diameter, nice elegant kind of flowing look there. And then the top is a nice rounded grippable spot. So those are kind of the two limitations I have when I'm making the design. So I focus on that, and then I'm going to do some details in the area of where these two parts are coming together. And I like to do some details at the bottom and maybe a little bit of detail at the top. So I'm just going to continue getting this rough down to a rough shape, and then I'm going to switch over to the skew and finish it up with my detail. Having more problems than usual. There we go. Making sure you don't go on the mill body, you do not go below 1 1/16". But on the mill head, you can bring your diameter down pretty much as far as you want to, so you can add a little more depth. I'm going to show you how I do that here. Just going to go ahead and use a parting tool, making sure I'm like at least 1 inch away from that connection. I don't want to bring it down too far. Okay, I'm going to get some more down there. Okay, so always gotta kind of remember where your division is. It's hard to see sometimes, so I'm gonna mark it like that. Now I'm gonna move on to finishing it with the skew. I use a skew just because I can reduce my sanding by using this. It takes me a little bit longer to turn it, but then versus a spindle gouge, but I can reduce my sanding time. So I'm not going to talk for a little bit. I'm just going to kind of work on details. Make sure my tool rest is a little higher for the skew. Bring it up a little closer. Make sure this is locked. Gotta minimize all vibration. Try some beads and codes. skew demonstration if I didn't get a small catch. So when I'm making beads, shadowing it and getting depth in between on the edges of the bead here is really crucial. As you can see, you probably can't see, but my bead isn't perfect. I just want to note that your beads don't have to be perfect when you're turning them. Using sandpaper, you can really redefine the top shape of a bead. They just have to have a nice general shape to them. And take that with a grain of salt, because yes, they have to be somewhat perfect. Sandpaper can fix some, but it can't fix everything. I still have a little bit of a flat area here, so I'm just feeling to check that out. Right there's the flat, and I have a little tear out from my nice catch. That's smooth. Redefine this curve here. That looks pretty good. So, using that, what is that called? Shearing cut? I don't know. I'm not too up on the lingo, like I said, but I know how to do it. But using that, I can get a very smooth surface that requires minimal sandpaper. That's what I'm all about. Getting a little bit narrow here, so I gotta be careful. Also have a little torn edges there. I'm gonna go ahead and do a little detail in the middle just for the heck of it. A little bead. I'm doing the edges of this bead, I gotta be careful. You can easily pop through the center. But I think I'm good on diameter there. Okay. The skew needs to be sharpened, but I'm just gonna roll with it. Alright. So I'm gonna call that pretty good for the bottom half here. Okay, now I'm gonna focus on the connection. I like to do a point or like a indentation, so it kind of flows together, and you really don't even see where the two pieces are separate, but they turn on that axis. So you don't want to bring that down too far here, but keep it using the long point. See, we lost our pressure there, so we got to retighten. Getting a nice clean cut. And I'm just kind of trying to see where that connection is. Sometimes, like I said, it's really hard to see. So I'm going to back it out, check it out. And I've got a little bit of a lip on the bottom here, so I'm going to try to fix that. be good. I'm gonna add a shoulder here for some detail. Clean it up. Coves and hollows with the skew ain't easy. I'm gonna switch to this is one of the main tools I use. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of start working the top. Right now I have it a little bit big. Using the long point, get a nice clean cut on this flat surface. Semi-flat surface. Bring this down. And do a little bead at the bottom here. Hope the camera can see this. Doubt it. Okay, I'm gonna redefine my, don't do that. It's alright. Redo that first. Anyways, just making my bead down there a little bit more defined. Okay, I'm gonna raise up my tools, tail rest, get that a little rounded over. And then continue right here. I don't want that to be too pointy at the top, so I'm going to stop it here. Add like another detail. Okay, let's stop the lathe and see what that looks like. Okay, so before I start sanding, I always stop the lathe and give it a nice good look over to see if there's anything I can improve on to reduce my sanding time. Just gonna give a closer look. Very little tear out, but there's definitely some areas that I could work on. Right here where I use the spindle gouge has more than normal. A little divot right here on that bead. And I saw something over here, but just I could work on this a little bit. But okay, I'm gonna do that for a second. And this is usually where you gotta catch with the skew and you gotta redo everything. Okay. Just adding a little chamfer there at the bottom, so it gives it kind of a lift. What else was there that this bead can be? Okay, now we're ready for sanding. I'm just gonna keep this in the video, but I don't know if I'm gonna... Whatever I'm gonna do with this video, I don't know. I think I'm gonna start with 150. 150, fold it into thirds is usually how I do it. And using those sanding techniques I kind of touched on earlier, always going back and forth. This is a fresh piece of 150. And it looks like I don't think it's going to take me much to sand this, but I said I can't hit that edge again, but you can. I'm going to go ahead and give that a little more sanding. Redefining my beads, I'm using the corner here, going back, up and down, back and forth, and kind of trying to shape that bead with the sandpaper as best I can. Going back and forth. As you can see, that bead is taking on a little better shape. Another thing to look at when sanding is the shade of the color of the wood. You want to get everything the same shade. If you're seeing different shades of color, that means some edges they're not all, or some surfaces are different, just different than others, not making it even. Making it even is kind of what we're aiming for here. This bead needs a little more work. Just gonna get it as best I can. This bead is a little fatter than this one, being a little more pointy, but oh well. I'm always kind of switching the area my sandpaper is hitting. Sometimes I want more grit, or sometimes I want a more used part, just depending on kind of what angle I'm looking for. Okay, this is my connection here, or my separation, I should say. Nothing really different when you're sanding that, just make sure you sand it thoroughly. Alright, this bead is a little harder to get to because it's so deep in there, but doing my best, kind of altering the sandpaper to make it fit in there better. Rounding over some edges too. I like to make my edges, some stay sharp, but rounding some over makes it look a lot better too. For example, like I look at this corner right in here, if you can see that, it has a nice sharp edge. Hopefully you can see it. I don't know if my dust hood was in the way or not. But then looking at this top corner, I like that rounded over. The shape looks a little better. And I know my pepper mills are definitely a different design than most. Most people do more of just a simple, straight, more elegant, I guess you could say. Mine's a little more ornate with more beads, coves, random shapes. But overall, it has a similar shape. All I care about is that it has a good feel and a nice, interesting look. So I'm looking right here. I have a little bit of tear out still, or just imperfections. Try to get rid of that. And same with turning. Look it over before you're done. Giving it a pass. I see this looks good, this looks good. Top looks good. A little bit here. And then the base. So very top and bottom I think I can hit again. And I kind of just change the shape of my bead by doing that, so I'm going to round that over as whatever this does, it gives a little shine, I guess. So I'm just going to show you what I got. Turn off my dust collector. Give you a little close up. So everything looks nice and smooth, no tear out. And that is a completed pepper mill that I will now finish. You can use a lot of different finishes. I've been experimenting with many different kinds. But I'm gonna go ahead and end the video now. I don't want to give away all my secrets, you know? I like that nice grain the ash has. I kind of like how the shape of this turned out too. So now you can go ahead and take this off. Make sure you finish these inside surfaces here. See, I have a little bit of a rough edge. I'm just gonna hand sand that right there. I would hand sand that and kind of clean it up. But thanks for watching me make this pepper mill.